Welcome to Parenting Teens with Dr. Cam, the podcast dedicated to helping you tackle the challenges of parenting teenagers without the drama. I'm your host, Dr. Cam. Let's get on with the show. Grief doesn't follow a script, and healing, it's not a straight line. Today's guest, Kristen Schindler, knows that firsthand. After losing her teenage son, Gavin, to suicide, she had to figure out how to keep showing up for herself, her family, and her faith while navigating a kind of pain no parent ever expects. We're going to talk about what that journey has looked like for her, what helped, what hurt, and how she's learning to live with grief instead of trying to get over it. Kristen also is going to share the small but powerful things that helped her begin to heal, how faith became a lifeline, and what she wants every parent to know about staying connected to their teen even after loss. Welcome, Kristen.
Thank you, Dr. Cam.
Absolutely. I am so thankful you're willing to come on and share your story. I'm already preparing myself. This is going to be a tough one, but I think it's really important. There's a lot of parents out there that need to hear this. So I would love for you just to start with your story.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much. And thank you for all the work that you've done. I know you and I connected many years ago, and I was on your podcast back then, and you were on my podcast, and we were podcast buddies back in the time frame when we both were getting started. My story is not anything that I thought that it was going to be. I just was saying that to my husband the other night. You know, we were kind of settling down for the night, and I just said, I never thought that this was going to be our life. And you know, we have I say 4 children. We have my oldest daughter is my bonus daughter, and she's going to be 28. And then my son Gavin, forever 21, and he's already in heaven. And then my son Logan, he just turned 19 last weekend. We had his birthday. And my daughter Ava is 15, and she's my youngest. And then I have a grandson from my bonus daughter, and we just celebrated his 2nd birthday this weekend. Yes. So the one thing is that, right, there's still joy in loss and sorrow. It's a constant battle, and to not be overcome by the sadness, that you can't enjoy the new joy that is manifesting and happening, you know, just because life continues after loss. So my oldest son Gavin is he was actually 21 when he passed, and he was my oldest. He was you know, as a boy, he was funny and silly, and if you see pictures of him, and I know that I gave you the link, but we had his celebration of life is actually on YouTube, and I don't know if you took a look at it, but it has 5,800 views so far. That's and amazing. Comments from all over the world of people. My husband and I, you know, we spoke at his celebration of life, and we wanted to share the message of hope with other people, because, you know, if you look at the pictures of Gavin growing up, he was the oldest. He was 2.5 when his brother was born. And then he was 6.5 when his sister was born. So he was always a big helper, big brother, you know, and that was kind of his, you know, that was part of his giftedness. He was, you know, as he got older, he was quiet. He had a lot of challenges in life. He was a dyslexic learner, so school was always very difficult for him. Communication and being quick to come back, he was always processing, so that kind of, you know, made him kind of the silent type, because he was trying to process a lot of what was going on. But he had a heart that he would help anybody, anywhere, anytime, almost to a fault. You know, I called him my big lumberjack, because he just was this big personality in terms of just like, he gave the best bear hugs. And, you know, he had struggled with, you know, really worrying about his future. He really struggled with, just that beginning adulting phase, you know, and, he had been in public school for many years. We pulled him from public school and we went to private school. And then private school was just not a good fit for him either. It was right before COVID, but he had had a surgery for a leg issue, and then he broke that leg after that surgery. And so it was just like the hits just kept coming, and but he seemed to be in a good place when we brought him home from public school. I told him, I said, look, your future is yours. Like, you can hack your own education. You don't have to follow what everybody else says is the best path for yourself. And so he wanted to go into welding. He had started welding when he was 12 on a family vacation up north into Door County. He kind of fell in love with welding, and he was really, really good at it. And it was like, finally, like as a parent, when you're so happy that your kid has found their thing, and so I was just overjoyed. But, I was with him every step of the way. Like, anytime something would come up, I'd say, you know what, this is okay. Like, we've got this. Like, let's just talk about this. It's together we can get through this. Like, it's not the end of the world. Right. And so he always was like, okay, Mom. And like, we'd talk about it later. Like, okay, what do you think about that? Like, how are you feeling now? He's like, yeah, I can see things are working out, And so, he and I were very, very close, during the time when he had surgery and then he broke his leg. It set his driving back. He couldn't get his driving license when everybody else did. And so, like, his senior year in high school, he was taking college classes and they were like, 40 minutes away. And so I would drive him up and I would drive home and then I'd drive it back up. So we had lots of windshield time that we talked about a lot of
I
things.
love that windshield time.
Yeah, I love it. And so, for me as a mom, like, when I look back, it was like I was lockstep with him, like always being an encourager, always being an encourager. And, I think that he just, over the last couple years, he started seeing, like, what is my future? Like, what do I really want out of life? He was struggling with identity. He was struggling to find his place. That 19 to 20-year-old, they're no longer in high school. So if they did have a big friend group, maybe that's shrunk. He never really had a huge friend group. He just had, a couple close friends. And so when those couple close friends then move away or, get in relationships and things like that, that can be really lonely and really hard. He gave the best advice to people. Like, he was always somebody who was a really good listener. But he had, had a couple losses, not only, academically or, just, physically, but he had a friend that he gamed with for many, many years that had suffered some kind of illness that, and he passed away. And it really, really upset Gavin. And, when kids are online and you're always like, oh, sure, you're playing video games with a person in a wheelchair in Georgia. Sure, that, you don't trust, anything. But it was true. And that mom actually went on to the boys' Xbox and kind of communicated with and sent the obituary and things like that. And I'll circle back to that later. But he really struggled, most recently with really knowing, I think it's that what's success, like the world tells us that success is X, Y, and Z. And if you're not doing X, Y, and Z, then where are you going and what are you doing? So he struggled with, the lies that the world tells us as adults, even, and as children, of what you have. And, with social media and with everything in their faces now, it's like, if you don't have so many followers or you're not doing this and this doesn't look, then what are you doing? Like, you're just taking up space kind of thing. But the thing that what we've seen on the backside, there's so many layers to loss, is that, he did have some underlying medical conditions that we were unaware of, that we didn't even know existed until after his passing. But he did have, depression and anxiety that was never diagnosed.
Yeah.
A problem that you have when your children are no longer 18, unless you have a medical power of attorney, you can't make appointments for them. You
Nope.
can't do any of that. So my husband and I, moving forward, that's something that we tell people all the time. You have kids going away to college for the first time, get that medical power of attorney, because you can't even get them an appointment to a counselor if they're not able to, because that's not allowed anymore,
Mm.
and we did try to get him to talk to somebody. He would say, I'm just tired a lot. I'm just really
Yeah.
tired. He went to his regular physician, and, he, was carrying more weight than he had been in the past, which is not uncommon for kids that, after they get out of high school. And so as a mom, I just thought, well, you're not eating the best, you're once they have their own money and they're buying their own food. And, he had been vaping, which he knew that wasn't something that I was happy about. But, I would always tell my kids, you're going to do things that don't always, aren't the best decisions, that I'm
Yeah.
not always going to like everything that you're doing. He lived at home with us, and he decided after he graduated from welding that he did not want to weld. He'd had a really bad experience when he worked on his apprenticeship. The hours were horrible. The people who were down at the docks where he had to work on the barges, he came home one night, he said, Mom, these people hate life. Like, I cannot
Mm.
do this job. I don't care how much they pay me. Like, I can't work there. And I said, buddy, just get done with your apprenticeship and you don't have to go back and work there. Find a different job doing something else. So he had decided to go to a local community college, technical college. And he really struggled with, he did everything was great except for the written tests. He had hundreds on all the practical stuff, all the hands-on stuff, but the way that the tests were written were very difficult, even though he was getting
Yeah.
support from, like having the tests read and things like that as a dyslexic learner. And so that wasn't a good fit, and that was a huge blow to him. And so, I said to him, like, I know this is really hard, but that doesn't mean that you can't go into automotive, right? Because he wanted to work with cars. Said it doesn't matter. This just means this isn't the right path for you. Like, in this, we can get to the same goal, but maybe we take another path. And so he agreed, and I had worked at the the number one GMC dealership in the nation here, located in Collinsville, Illinois. And so he got on as a porter. And it was the best place that he had worked. The guys, I had worked there, so I knew it was a great place. And so the guys were wonderful. They were kind. They were kind of like the mentors, these young men, they need kind, good guys that are going to walk alongside them, and not have this bravado, put down, which is very common, um, but they asked him if he wanted a promotion, and he, said yes. And so then what did that mean? Then he had to do more schooling. Then he had to do more tests.
Mm.
And so he didn't do well on
Mm.
this particular test that he needed to take. And he was so worried about it. Like, what am I going to do? Am I going to lose my job? And I said, you just have to be honest with them. You have to tell them what happened. And he did. And I was so proud of him, and they actually gave him a raise, and they said, don't worry about it. You study, you'll do it again next month. So that was July 31st that he didn't do well on that test, and he took his life August 30th.
Mm.
So he, in that month, like, he had been studying, he, from the outside as a parent, there was nothing that was out of sorts for us as
Yeah.
a family. And I tell that to families because when loss occurs, what you start doing is you start going back and you start thinking, like, what did I miss? Where were the red flags? For us, I think the red flags were like over the last couple years. One thing that we found out after the fact, because the way he took his life there did not need to be an autopsy. But they do that naturally in our county, which not all counties do that. And I'm so very grateful that they did, because when they did the autopsy, they found that at 21 years old, he had 2 heart blockages. He had a 55% blockage and a 75% blockage.
Wow.
So, it's a bittersweet, information that's shared, because on one hand, as a mom, you're like, my child was suffering with this and I had no idea. But it kind of put into perspective, some things, like when you start, because you try to make sense of it. You're trying to, your
Right?
brain is trying to make sense of it. And forever moving forward, there's things that come up that you don't expect to come up. But when you think about your brain, and you think about, the way that your brain would work in a healthy capacity, when you have blockages of that amount, blocking your blood flow, making you tired, so when he would say, I'm just so tired, looking back, well, yeah, he was tired, but he physically
Was
was
exhausted.
not well. But we didn't know, and, I had spoken to his physician after, because he's our physician, and I shared that with him, and he was just flabbergasted. But Gavin hadn't even talked to his physician about how tired he was. He hadn't shared how depressed and had, anything with him. And the physician talked to me about that afterwards. He shared the notes with me that, this is what, he never brought up, like, hey, doc, I'm just really struggling, and I think he didn't want to be a burden. And that's, we find a lot of times with people that take their lives, they just feel like there's nothing's going to get better, and they don't want to be a burden to their loved ones, which is a complete oxymoron of, like, what happens when you have to survive without them, right? So a couple things that I think, and I'm not a scientist, I'm not a physician, I'm not a doctor, but having done, a lot of reading from, since our loss, and knowing what we know about COVID, even for people that have had COVID, and he had COVID early on, like very early. We have heart disease in our family. It's on my dad's side. My cousin just had quintuple bypass at like 45. So I think that this was just like the perfect storm for our son, both with mental health and physical health. He struggled with, anxiety and depression. I think we know now that whatever your body struggles with, COVID can cause it to be amplified. My best friend had this happen for herself. And I saw it firsthand. I walked her through that. So I think for Gavin, you look at the mental health component, that his anxiety and depression was just exacerbated by, after having, COVID. But then you have the physical part where whatever, and we're seeing it with, like, turbo cancers and just things that people have, that, like, inflammatory responses. They've always had maybe lupus, and then after COVID, it just, like, goes through the roof. And I think that that's what happened. This is my own personal thought, that I think that that's what happened with his heart, that he was probably going to be like my cousin at 45, was probably going to need heart surgery. But I think it just amplified, because the medical examiner told me that in 25 years of doing what he did, he had never seen a 21-year-old have heart blockages like that.
Wow. Yeah.
So, then he said, you need to have your other children checked, which we did. But it's 7 months, we've just hit the 7-month mark. And, I'd like to say that it gets easier, but it doesn't.
No.
I was telling someone the other day that I think grief is kind of one of those things, and grief is different for everybody, but parenting through grief is really hard,
Yeah.
because you are compartmentalizing your grief. And if you have little kids, then they don't understand. My kids are older, but everybody, it's just different. But I feel like grief is one of those things when you're going through it and loss, it's like you're being told that you now have a new job, that you're going to be traveling every day for the rest of your life. You're going to be traveling. And if you were told that, you might overpack, right?
Hmm.
The first time you're on, the first couple trips. And then you're like, well, that I don't need that. Right. And what I mean by that is, like, I started like joining all of these Facebook groups about grief and loss and suicide. Don't do that. I'm just telling you right now, it'll mess up your algorithm and you will never find joy again.
Oh,
Like, it's just not good. Right.
yeah.
But you overpack because you don't know what you're doing. You're just trying
Right.
to survive. Right. Or you underpack, and because you don't know what to do, and then you're
You're
not
in
doing
denial
anything,
too. Yeah.
and that's that shock, which, I was talking to my daughter the other day, and, she said, I just feel like I'm just now starting to thaw. And I
Mm,
thought, and it's springtime here in the Midwest, and so it's kind of very poignant with how we've gone through, all the seasons, like all the first holidays, all of, those types of things. We've all personally, other than my bonus daughter, we've all had our first birthday without him here,
yeah.
which, it's just surreal. You just think that your brain cannot comprehend what's happening. But I think, it goes back to like what I was saying about like the traveling. It's like, if you'd never had a job that had to travel before, and then your friend said to you, oh, Cam, here's some travel cubes for you. So, don't put your toothpaste in your toothbrush. Don't be putting them back. Here's a travel cube. Put everything you need in here. And then you like learn like, oh, like here are some tools. Here are some things that are going to help you, to travel easier. That's kind of like how I feel grief is like, because it's a trip that you've never been on if it's your first time. But even if so, because every loss, like maybe I lost grandparents when I was younger, this is completely different. And
Yeah.
suicide is, there's, you know, there's no way as a parent, it just feels different than,
Yeah.
not more than or not less than, but just different than other losses, because there's so many areas where you think, how did I failed,
Yeah. Yeah. I
you know.
can.
And that's the thing that I want to tell parents. Like, I've talked to so many parents. I've talked to parents who their children had support their whole lives. They suffered from depression and anxiety, and because then you start thinking, oh well, what if he would have been on medication, then he wouldn't have taken his life. If he would have talked to a support person, then he wouldn't have taken his life. Well, I have friends that their children did that even with all that support.
Yeah. There's no way of knowing.
No, or people who their children are in their 30s and they'd suffered for years, and the families always supported the children, and no, like the biggest cheerleaders, and then the darkness came, and I'm a believer, and so I know what happens is that the enemy just isolates them and lies to
Mm.
them about what they're able to bring to the table, and they just are so tired of fighting that they just they want to go home. They're
Yeah.
like a little kid that wants to go home. They're on a sleepover and they're just like, I want to go home. I'm tired of this, and that's the only, you know, for us, we cling to that he is
Mm.
no longer suffering. And because he was suffering a lot more than any of us knew, obviously,
Yeah.
you know.
Kristen, I want to ask, I want to kind of help parents a little bit with the before. So self-reflecting back, and I do want to reiterate, you did everything. You did everything, right? And so we do everything. And there's parents I know that are living with this fear that something's not right. Their kids have even said things are not right. They don't know what to do because they fear this is looming to them and they want to stop it. And in retrospect, you did everything and you couldn't. So what do you say to parents that are in that place right now, that are in complete dread?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you bring that up, because I had a friend who I saw probably just a couple weeks after Gavin's passing. She was actually my very first guest on my first podcast ever. And she said, "Kristen, I just don't understand. How did this happen to your family?"
Yeah.
And it's really made me think a lot about families, right? Because we have this image in our head that if we raise them right, if we love them enough, if we provide what we need to provide, that you send them to the right schools, you hack their own education, all the things, right? We can't save our children. And that is the hardest part with suicide survivorship, is because as a parent, from the time that they're born, we're keeping them from hurting themselves, from running in front of cars, from putting their fingers in front of light sockets, from choking on hot dogs, right? And all I can tell those parents is, you just do the best that you can, but you can't save them.
Yeah.
They have to make the choice themselves. And that is a very, very hard pill to swallow, and I've learned that I can't make my identity my children.
Yeah.
Because if we put our identity in anything, okay, it could be our jobs, it could be whatever, but as parents, if we make our identity that our kid is a star soccer player and we're always there and we're taking them to everything, and then that star soccer player blows his knee out and can't play soccer anymore.
Yeah.
Right? And for me, and for parents who have children who've taken their lives, if your identity is only as a mom, when your child has taken their lives, it's the ultimate betrayal of all the work you've ever done. So according to the world, right, I failed.
Yeah.
That's what the world and the enemy wants us to think, is that we failed.
Yeah.
And that's not the case. That's not true. That's another lie.
Right. Because if you think about it, as a parent, you succeeded because you did everything you possibly could and you loved on him so much and you gave him everything you could possibly give him. And that is all you can do as a parent.
Well, and I think too, like, especially, you have to love your children where they are. You can't love your children for the potential of what you think they're going to become.
Thank you. Yes.
And I think that that's really, really hard. My son had made a lot of choices that I knew were not God's best for him. And we had those conversations, like, is this relationship like what you really want out of life? Like, is this, or are you settling because you feel like I just don't want to be alone? We had those hard conversations, and I was like, you're going to make your decisions. Like, I'm going to support you. That doesn't mean I'm going to like what you're doing. It doesn't mean that I think, from my perspective, that that's the best view of what you should do, but that's what you have to learn how to do, And so I know for myself, he was suffering. And I think that part of it is that he knew how much I had supported him. He knew that I would go to the lengths of the world to do what needed to be done. But I think he also felt like, and he would tell me this, he'd say, "Mom, there's just certain things I have to do on my own."
Yeah.
But looking back, I'm glad that I had those conversations with him. I'm glad that I walked alongside with him, because I know that there's nothing else that I could have done. I mean, I can't make the appointments for him. I can't drive him, and just say, kick the kid out of the car and go, hey, you go in there, like that's not really helping them to learn how to adult either.
And there's no way to say that would have saved him.
No. And that's the other thing I had, because here's the other thing. I live in a place where I'm just know that I have multiple people in my lives who have lost loved ones. They've lost spouses to suicide. They've lost parents to suicide. And, one thing that has been really difficult for me after my son's passing, he lived with us and he never was late to curfew. Never. He knew, like, hey, I don't sleep well at night. I need you home at a certain time. And he was always very respectful of that. But the day before he passed, he asked if he could take his sister up from school. He had his dream car, it was a Camaro, red Camaro with a black stripe. He had just gotten new tires on it the day before. $800 tires. He loved them. He came and showed me them at work. He was so proud of them. He asked if he could pick his sister up from school because he hadn't been able to do that. She had just started going to private school in August. And so she'd been homeschooling up until then, the last 7 years. So I said, yeah, go ahead and pick her up, take her to therapy, physical therapy. She had had knee surgery. I said, it would be so helpful. So he did. And he was all dressed in his, he had his cowboy hat on and he was blasting cowboy music. I had quizzed him that morning. I said, hey, you're going to be taking your CDL again. How do you feel that you're doing? He's like, I feel really good about it. I said, well, there's this test quiz kind of thing. I could download it. I could ask you questions and then see how you're doing. He said, yeah, let's do it. He gave me his ATM card. I looked it up. I was quizzing him. He knew the answers, Cam. He was like this, he felt good. He's like, I feel really confident. So that night, Thursday night, we were having dinner and I said, so what'd you do the rest of your day after you dropped your sister off? And he said, well, I went and got some pizzas for the guys at work because it was his day off. And he said, I took the guys some pizzas, and I just wanted to, thank them because they're great guys to work with. Mm-hmm. Looking back, he had already made the decision.
He was saying goodbye.
He was saying goodbye because it was the best place he had worked. And he did not want them thinking that they did anything wrong, and, but so I have a hard time sleeping. I'm 51 years old at the time he passed, between menopause and dogs and cats. And, I'm getting up in the middle of the night to let the dog out or to go to the bathroom myself. I rarely sleep through the night. And he left our house at 2:30 in the morning, which was that was completely out of character. He had to move my vehicle to get his vehicle out of the driveway. I didn't hear anything. The dog didn't hear anything. I didn't get up in the middle of the night, even after he left, and because I would have seen his car was gone. Nothing. Yeah. And, we talk about, and I know that, you mentioned faith and that's, I didn't lose my faith through this process, but you question but why? Yeah. Why couldn't I have been woken up like I'm woken up any other night? Why did I not?
Would it have made a difference?
And my friend said, Kristen, and I think about this and I think that it was a walk that Gavin had to take on his own. This was not, I could not save him. And I wouldn't have been able to save him on the outside too. Like if I would have stopped him that night, my friend said, would you have been able to sleep any other night after that?
No.
And that's what, and sadly, that's what, parents of addicts feel like when their child, like, is tonight the night that they're going to OD in my house? Is tonight the night that I'm going to get the call? They haven't been home, so my heart, with this loss, it allows, if you allow that grief, you are broken wide open. Like I've told people, there's nothing that could happen to me in this world that the worst has happened.
Yeah.
As a parent, as a mother, the worst has absolutely happened. So, it allows you, if you allow it, to become so much more compassionate for people.
Mm.
And so, that's what I've done, is I've just like decided to lean in. And but you have to process a lot to get to where you are. And every relationship with every child is different. Every backstory is different. Every household is different. I did go, and once I got Gavin's phone back, because they needed to look to make sure that there was no extortion or, all that stuff that can happen now for people, that's why they take their lives, right? None of that had happened. But I was able to log on and look at every one of his social media accounts, because as a mom, I was like, was there somewhere where he
Yeah.
was talking to someone
Yeah.
that he was able to tell how he felt? And nowhere, not on any message, did he ever share. He was always the one giving advice.
Mm.
And so I did the same thing that his friend's mom did. I copied his obituary, and I wrote a message, and I sent it to every one of his friends, people that he had never met, in person, but knew online in various places. And I felt like he would have wanted me to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's it. You just, as a parent, you're not going to be able to save them. And that's a
Yeah.
really, really hard thing to feel,
Yeah.
and you could save them that one time. And then the next time, 2 times from now, if they really want to go, they're really going to go. There's not going to be a way that you're going to be able to stop it. And I know that now on the side that we are. And so we choose to just focus on the way he lived his life, and the way he loved others, and the way that he showed up for others. But it is hard, because you see what a kind person he was. And you also see how many blows that he had,
Mm.
and how that must have felt to him.
Yeah. So Kristen, now that you're not far over the other side, I mean, this is still so brand new. What can you tell parents who are in this position and are struggling? And I would imagine, as a parent, you're struggling to forgive yourself. There's no way you're not going to sit there and replay over and over again, trying to figure out what the one thing was that you were supposed to do. And like you said, there wasn't. But there's no way I can imagine you're not going there. So how do you learn to forgive yourself? How do you learn to forgive your child? And how do you move on with the people in your life and still hold on to that child without it impacting? Because I've seen people that kind of go with the child and all of a sudden abandon the people in their lives now too. So what do we do?
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot, because, you know, I think for me, a lot of it has to do, as a person who believes that each person has sacred gifts that they were given to then bring to the world, right? I think the thing that I cling to is that if I would have died with Gavin emotionally, then I've let the enemy win.
Hmm.
Because Gavin, as a believer, I believe that Gavin is going to heaven. Like, that's my personal conviction, right? So the enemy really didn't win. Gavin just went home, right? But all the things that Gavin was supposed to do in life, all the people he was supposed to listen to, how he was supposed to share his story to help other people, that got cut short. So if I also allow grief to suffocate me,
Mm-hmm.
then what I'm doing is I am now allowing my gifts and talents to be
Yeah.
stolen as well. And so that's where I've said, like, it's important for us to lean into where we are in life. These are not but Cam, we're not special in our suffering.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what can happen is like we become so introverted about how sad we are that we forget that there are so many other people also suffering.
Yeah.
And maybe they don't have support. Maybe they don't have communities of a net to help them through this time. Um, I've talked to my children about, because I know that there are some families where they don't even like talk about the child again. Like they can't, it's too painful.
Yeah.
And I said, we're not, and especially with suicide, the stigma behind suicide is, and I'll tell you, I'm on social media a lot, but after this happened, there were many days that I wasn't doing anything, right after his passing. And the first day that I logged on to my social media account, I was going to, share and put out there what had happened. The very first post that was on my screen, my feed, was a local group that we have. And the post was about my son's car and about that day. It was the very first one
That's
that, yeah,
wild.
I know. And I was like, and I'd already talked to my children and my family and saying, look, we're not going to be shy about mental health and especially men's mental health
Yeah.
and men's health in general, right? Because it was his physical health as well as we didn't know that it was his physical health at that
Yeah.
point, but we obviously knew it was his mental health. And so I felt like, well, here's your chance to walk the walk, right? Like you can talk the talk, but and some days it's easier to talk the talk than walk the walk through grief. And you have to give yourself grace
Yeah.
and just take some time to yourself. But there were so many people that were saying things that were not true and not accurate, about, oh, I think it was someone who OD'd or, da 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 da, very, and I just thought, no, this is not going to be how the story goes, and so I went on to that group and I just laid it out there and I said, the car
Yeah.
that you saw was my son's. He was 21 years old. He was suffering with depression and anxiety, and he took his life and he shot himself. And I want you to know the truth of what happened. And I did that because I wanted to control the narrative. I wanted people to know, but I also said, if you are struggling, know that you're not alone.
Yeah.
Please reach out. Please reach out to, just tell one person, because my son didn't. And, that's the hardest part as a parent. And I felt like, I couldn't save my son, but if by sharing his story helps to save somebody else who then can make that decision,
Yeah.
that's what I can do.
Yeah. You've turned your grief into empathy, and that is an amazing thing to be able to do.
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, there's days where I was just telling my husband and I, we've been going out on Mondays, just he and and I had a great day yesterday. My mom and I and my two daughters, we went to the Missouri Botanical Gardens. The tulips are in full bloom. It was a beautiful day. And you're like, okay, like, today's a good day, and I got online and I was checking some email and I had to get some things done. And my daughter, they're like, hey, you need to re-enroll for next year. And I'm like, oh, I'll just get this done real fast. I get on the computer and I'm, going through the stupid application. Everything is already filled out. I just have to like check it all off. And I get to the part about who are the people that can pick her up.
Yeah.
And there's his name.
Yeah.
And that's the part. Those are the ones that just like, they get you every time
Punch you
because
in
you
the
don't
face.
see him. It's a gut punch, you know? And it's like, I
Mm.
have to delete his name.
Mm.
And it's like, and they all know, right? I mean, if I didn't delete his name, they would know. But it's just like, those are the things that can just totally derail you,
Yeah.
you know? And you as a parent, especially when you have other kids, like you just have to keep going because they need you. But when you sit and you actually think about like what my child really did, like it's horrific.
Yeah.
It's absolutely horrific, but it also makes you feel like he must have, because you know them, he must have been suffering so badly to feel, you know. And he did send me a text message that never got sent. Well, he drafted one. And it was at 3:30 that morning. We were able to figure out that he
Mm.
probably took his life a little after 4 a.m. based on technology. But at 3:30, he drafted a text message to me saying, "I'm not okay. I'm suffering in silence, and it's all too much. I love you."
My gosh. Yeah.
And, you know, he didn't send it. And I know why he didn't send it, because he really didn't want to say goodbye. And he really probably wasn't sure what he was going to do. But, you know, the people that I've talked to who are close friends who have dealt with depression, they've said to me, Kristen, they have said, like, it gets so dark, it's so hard. And you're in just physical pain too, that you just want the pain to end. You know, and I think he also knew, I think he may have been afraid if he sent it that I would have, you know, we had Life 360, you know, that kind of stuff, that I would have known where he was and I would have seen. And I don't believe my son wanted me to find him, but
Mm.
it ended up that I did anyway, just by the way that everything played out. But I don't think that that was his intention.
Yeah.
So the whole thing is just still so surreal for us to be like, how is this our life? But
Yeah.
yet we know that so many other people, you know, go through it as well. My husband is a police officer. He's going to be retiring later this year. And he was talking to an older woman the other day. She's 96 and she lost two sons, a daughter and a granddaughter. And, you know, she said, I just choose to be happy
Mm.
because it's a choice, you know?
Yeah.
And I think you just have to choose to not allow the darkness that stole your child to steal you, and to like the things that you loved about that child, and that child, the way that they lived their life before the darkness lied to
Yeah.
them and you know, engulfed them, like putting those things out in the world. So, you know, for Christmas, I said, we're going to, my son was an amazing gift giver. He was so thoughtful, so thoughtful. And I said, what I want us to do is I want us to give, you know, kind of like random acts of kindness, but instead I want you to do something and don't tell the rest of us, but do something creative and thoughtful that your brother would have done. And then what we did was, because I knew the holidays were going to be hard,
Yeah.
right? But I thought, you know, we're not going to just like not celebrate, because that's not good for us and it wouldn't be what he would want either, right? So I said, what I want all of us to do is I want us to do something and write it down on a piece of paper of what you did. And then what we did was we hung his stocking up, and then everybody wrote down on their paper what they did. And if it was something like what my daughter did, like she had a picture taken of her doing it. So, and then Christmas morning, after we opened our presents, then we all put pulled out and made sure it wasn't ours, and we read something else that someone did.
Nice.
And it was like a random act of kindness kind of thing. And then we did the same thing at my mom and dad's later that day, and my extended family, we did the same thing. We passed and we reread the ones that we did because they hadn't, heard what we did and stuff. And it was hard, it was sad, but it was also, like my daughter brought cookies and pizzas to his work.
Mm.
And thanked them and wrote a beautiful card thanking them for being an amazing place that he worked and that he really loved working there, because they're still grieving, all of those men that he worked with, they are still like, they feel guilty. Like, why didn't we see anything? Why did, maybe we should have invited him to more things, like, just that kind of stuff that everybody goes through. But that's something that
everybody feels like they were the one to blame, right?
Right. Yeah. And then moving forward, Gavin's birthday is July 15th, and it's summertime. So like as a family, a lot of times we would travel during the summer. And in some years when he was a teenager, he'd be like, I don't like we have to travel on my birthday all the time, and I was like, you get a vacation for your birthday. Like, but so anyway, I decided, and I told the family, I said, okay, moving forward, we're not going to go on his birthday. But the day after his birthday, like every year moving forward, like we're going on a family trip. I don't care where we go, but we're going to go for at least a week, and we're going to have intentional time. And my mom and dad are going to go with us. My brother can't go this year because they have sports and stuff, but my mom and dad and like my bonus kids and our significant others of our kids and all that kind of stuff. And I said, moving forward, just know 16th through at least the 20th of every year moving forward, we're doing this. It's on your calendar, so being intentional with how we move forward, and luckily my family is willing to do that. Some families won't be able to, because there'll be division, and it has a lot to do with the relationships of the person who's deceased and those relationships with their loved ones. It can be very challenging depending on, what that was. So we're blessed that we're able to do that and find healing in that and honor him. Yeah.
I love that. And when you think about it, a lot of the kids, they don't tell you what's going on because they don't want to be a burden. And so when this happens and you lose them, the last thing they would want is for them to continue being a burden. So I think in that light too, what you're saying is you're honoring him by doing what he was hoping, right? By not being the burden, by being something that brings joy into your life. And I love that you're able to do that. That's really beautiful. So Kristen, what is, I guess, one big takeaway for parents who are going through this loss? What is one thing you want them to just take away from this and to know?
I think that they need to be intentionally gentle with themselves. And there's no way that you're going to ever be the same.
Yeah.
You can't. It's impossible. Taking time for themselves in whatever way that looks like, to reevaluate what life looks like moving forward. I would also, the other thing that I do want to say is, I've had instances where, to make other people feel comfortable, I've kind of grief masked. If I don't know that that's really a phrase.
It's a great phrase, though.
I'm coining it, just trademarking it right now.
Great one.
Because it's different than when you mask grief by like drugs or alcohol. This is an intentional masking to make other people feel comfortable.
Yeah. And I'm fine. Yeah.
Or, like 7 months out, I was out to dinner with some friends and they were a completely safe space. They would not have mattered. But I was actually talking about Gavin being a great gift giver, and it made me think about, a memory, and it just like, you just feel like you're just gonna like lose it, and we were in a restaurant and we'd had a great day, and I was just like, I don't want to be that friend. Like, they just will never know. Like, is Kristen going to cry about this? Because then they feel like they're on eggshells, And so
Yeah.
I didn't let it out. And it wouldn't have been like, I wasn't going to be wailing in the restaurant, but I told my friend it would be like if you and I were at dinner and I had a splinter and I was like, oh my gosh, Cam, I got, and you're like, we are at a restaurant. Like, that is really like, what are you doing? And then instead of letting it out, I just like pushed that splinter in even further. And that's what I did emotionally.
Yeah.
And for 2 days later, I couldn't release it. And it was almost like I amplified and magnified that weight of grief, because the grief is always going to be there with you moving forward. You have to just learn how to carry it. Just like when they were toddlers and you have to shift them because you have to figure out how to carry them as they get bigger. The grief is there, but you just have to, you get stronger. Those grief muscles get stronger. But when you feel like you just let it out, because then for 2 days after, it just became heavier and heavier until I had a conversation with my bonus daughter, as she has suffered loss as well. And she just became a Christian life coach, and she shares about that loss on her website. And I shared with her about this, this grief mask, and I just let it out, and I cried, but it wasn't even like, it didn't even like take a long time. It was like it was less time on an Instapot releasing the valve. I mean, it was just, but I just needed to get it out. So, be gentle with yourself, be intentional with taking time for yourself, especially if you're parenting other children, and attending to their needs. But just don't be afraid to let people know that you're not doing okay, because nobody expects you to be doing okay. And don't be hard on yourself if you think, how am I even able to have this conversation and not cry? Because your body and your brain and everything is having to be recalibrated to a completely different operating system than ever existed before. And it's ever changing. Every day is different. Some days are filled with joy and some days are still filled with sorrow. But I'm so grateful that the joy ones are there to balance it out.
Well, I am grateful that you were able to come on and share your story. We went very long today, but I think it was a really important story to share. And you had so many great insights, and parents that stayed. They definitely needed to stay and hear all of this and listen. So thank you so much for joining us, Kristen. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And that's a wrap. Thank you, parents, for taking time out of your busy day to listen in. I appreciate you. If you found the episode enlightening, please like, review, and share with a friend navigating the teen years. Until next time, stay curious. Remember, there's always more to the story than what you see.